We have two experts with us here today to kind of give their contributions and their thoughts on this topic. And we have Kim Frankovich.
Hey,
and go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
And Jackie Schultz. Maybe you can introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your credentials.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm Kim Frankovich. I lead global sustainability here for Griffith Foods. I've been working in sustainability now for over 17 years. Started with a food packaging company, spent 9 years there, and have spent the last 10 at a food company. So over to you, Jackie.
All right. Thanks, Kim. Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie Schultz. I'm the Global Nutrition Director here at Griffith Foods. I've been here for almost 3 years now, and I'm a registered dietitian based here in the US and have been working as a registered dietitian for over 20 years. So really excited to talk to you about sustainable nutrition today.
So just real quickly, before we get into our subject matter experts, we're going to talk a little bit about our agenda. So we're going to kind of run through why focus on sustainable diets. I know many of you have gone through the World Chef's courses on sustainability, but we're going to talk a little bit about why focus on sustainable diets. What is a sustainable diet? We'll talk about definitions and characteristics, as well as applications. And then we'll talk about key recommendations for a sustainable diet and health. So that's sustainable nutrition piece. And finally, I'll end up coming back online, and we're going to do a little bit of a demo that kind of demonstrates some of the information that Kim and Jackie will be sharing. So to get moving on, we'll go ahead and start. We'll have Kim Frankovich start with why focus on sustainable diets.
Great. Thank you, Chef Mark. And you can see we're in a kitchen, so this is a new experience for all of us, hosting live here. So yes, let me get started with a little bit about people, planet, and some science. So just to ground us here on our planet, we've got about 8 billion folks. We're headed to nearly 10 billion. We'll hit 10 billion past 2050. About 30% of the Earth's surface is for land. That's both continents and also islands. And the bulk of it, as many of you all know, is covered in water. 97% of that is oceans. I've highlighted here the 3% of water in lakes, rivers, ice caps, and also in the ground, because that's what's available eventually for us to drink and also for food production. I also want to highlight a little bit about biodiversity. So the estimates are there's about 8.7 million species of plants and animals. That'll become relevant here in a few moments, but we've discovered a little over 1 million. So there's a lot of discovery still out there, and more to come. So moving on to a concept called planetary boundaries. This is a concept some of you may be familiar with through the coursework, whether it's through the chef's curriculum or elsewhere. But this is about, think about it in terms of those processes and boundaries that regulate the Earth, right? And keep us in a healthy balance. And science back in 2009 came up with these planetary boundaries. And there was about 29 world-renowned scientists that, can you go back to the other slide? Sorry. That talked about sort of thinking about how do we stay in balance as we grow, right? Both us and animals and forests, or not grow, and how do we stay in check? So I want to just highlight a couple of these, and then I'll show you the trend, sort of what's transpired over the last 14 years. So novel entities, I get a lot of questions about that. That's actually representing synthetic chemicals, microplastics, endocrine disruptors, that type of thing. And when you see it headed from green, which is a safe space, and you're going outwards to the yellow and red and purple, that becomes when we become out of balance. On the left-hand side, I want to talk just the biosphere integrity. That's actually about biodiversity and biodiversity loss and how that comes into play, not only for us, but the forests. And the last one I wanted to highlight is it's called the biogeochemical flows. I get a lot of questions on that as well. The P is phosphorus, the N is nitrogen. Why these are important and important to see that we're headed into a high risk zone is because that's related to fertilizer use and fertilizer runoff. So you see this in nitrogen runoff and algae blooms, depending on where you are around the world and what water. So what this is saying and telling us, and if we go on the next slide, is we're ebbing and flowing not in the right direction. We're headed into areas where those planetary boundaries that keep us all in check from a healthy planet perspective are becoming imbalanced and are imbalanced. And think about this also as it relates to sort of your own health. It doesn't mean immediate doom. It means that as we aggregate in different areas and don't put those in check and don't do some adaptation and do some adjustments, it's going to become a little bit more difficult for all of us. So think about it like blood pressure. You get a high blood pressure check, your blood pressure is up. Doesn't mean that you're going to have an immediate heart attack. However, if you don't do some lifestyle changes, don't do some adaptation on exercise, and don't get that in check, then it starts to have additional health implications for you. So moving on, I'm going to move now into the food system. A little bit about the planet. Let's talk about the impact of the food system, both from a people and a planet perspective. These represent, again, sort of tying back to those planetary boundaries. About 46% of that land that we have available is actually used for agriculture. So as we grow in population, we need more efficient use of that land. We need good soils. And we want to preserve forests. So trying to keep that flat is going to become additionally challenging. When you think about climate change and global warming, 31% of the food system, 31% of the greenhouse gas emissions are coming from the food system. And you need to think about that from all the way from the farm, all the way to our plates and food waste. So long chain there and different things that are driving that. I talked about biodiversity. So 50% of human-induced pressures on biodiversity is actually linked to the food system. Where you see this is where you have forests that are being cleared for agriculture production, where you have, this can also be wildfires and other things, but it's quite a significant impact that also impacts extinction, but also the ability of those forests to recover. The last one there is around water. So when you think about 3% of the world's fresh water being available for use, 70% of that is also being used for agriculture. So you begin to see why the food system and why we all have an incredible opportunity to help play a role as it relates to sustainability. And I would be remiss to not talk about the people. So we have, and this number comes often as a surprise, that we have nearly over 600 million small family farms that are actually producing a third of the world's food supply. Oftentimes we think of these as large commercial, thousands and thousands of hectares, which there is, but there is a big population that is actually feeding us that are family-based farms. And when you think of all of us in the food system, right, from those that make the food, process the food, come up with the formulations, you can see there's billion of us that are actually playing a positive impact and also generating our livelihoods from it. So that's why it's a fun space to be in sustainability if you're in the food system. So moving on, I want to talk about and just lay the groundwork a little bit, and again, tying back to land use and greenhouse gas. We can look at this a number of ways. These are just two that I pulled, which I think are interesting, which is looking at of the land that we're using, how much of it is being used per kilogram of food product. And you start to see sort of some trends here as it relates to animals versus plants and tree nuts or tree crops as well. The right-hand side is a rendition of the greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with that. So when you take a step back and you say, okay, you know, how do I think about sustainability? How do I think about sustainable nutrition? Some of this can help inform sort of what are those choices that might be available to us as we think about diets. and food loss. So food loss is a big one. When you think about food loss, either at the farm level, as it's transported, the packaging doesn't work to preserve the food. We get it to our homes, we get it to the restaurants or the conferences and all of the places around the world, and we don't consume that food. It ends up oftentimes as food waste, and it oftentimes ends up in a landfill, where not only is it lost value in terms of dollar value, but it's also in terms, it's driving more emissions. So when that food decomposes in landfills, it actually produces methane, which is a higher greenhouse gas contributor. So we have a huge opportunity to play on food waste. And you see, if you look at it from a country size, it would be the third largest country in the world in terms of its greenhouse gas emissions. So we have a huge opportunity to play a role there. So I want to talk a bit before I hand over to Jackie about us as households and individuals. What can we do? Project Drawdown is a non-for-profit organization whose sole mission is to help with climate solutions. And that is to bring things about both pragmatically and quickly. And so there was a book put out in 2017 called Drawdown, and there's a website, and they published sort of the top 20. I've put the top 5 here. So you can begin to see the connection on food waste, as well as incorporating more plants into our diets. My last slide before I hand it over to Jackie is more information. So the World Resources Institute has put out an amazing, also pragmatic, practical solutions for industry, business, policymakers on creating a sustainable food future, and the one I mentioned on Drawdown. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jackie.
Thank you, Kim. Well, thank you, Kim. That was a fantastic setup, because as you can see, and Kim set me up very nicely, there's a lot of corollaries between the topic of sustainability and nutrition. So I'm going to kick this off by taking you on a bit of a journey regarding how we've started to figure out the definition of a sustainable diet. So a lot of us probably have some assumptions about what a sustainable diet is. I think some of you have already contributed a little bit about what you think goes into a sustainable diet. But rest assured, this is a conversation that has been happening at a global scale for quite some time. So starting with what we have here in 2010, there was a meeting conducted by the United Nations that was ultimately put into a report published in 2012. And that basically stated that a sustainable diet goes beyond environmental impact. So it also arguably goes beyond the food that you choose on your plate. They're all very interconnected, as Kim nicely just shared with you. And they ultimately defined from this discussion at a global level that sustainable diets are really ones with low environmental impact that contribute to food and nutrition security. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and to healthy life for both present and future generations. Sustainable diets are also protective and respectful of biodiversity and ecosystems. They're culturally acceptable. They obviously have to fit in with the culture that they are being related to. They're accessible, economically fair and affordable, nutritionally adequate, safe and healthy, while optimizing natural and human resources. So it's a tall order. There's a lot going on, but it does consist of 4 dimensions, which are the ones that you'll see up here on the slide. Nutrition and health is one of those, economics, society and culture, and the environment. So a sustainable diet needs to keep in scope all 4 of those things. And on the next slide, you'll see that there was another discussion that I actually had the privilege of being part of in 2018 at the National Academies of Medicine here in Washington, DC. And this is a National Academies workshop brought together by key thought leaders who noted that sustainable diets should have a low environmental impact, but should also be healthy, affordable, and acceptable to society. Nutrition is only as good as what we will actually eat, right? So if we want to make sustainable diets successful, they also have to be something that people want to eat and are comfortable eating. So it really requires us to look at food systems, as Kim started to share with you, versus just looking at the individual food itself. And this quote by Dr. Adam Janowski is one that I think is really sums it up nicely. Diets are not healthy and sustainable. They are sustainable only if they are healthy to begin with. So on the next slide, this is a bit of a complex slide, so I'm going to walk you through it, but this is a conceptual framework of the food system that's been developed. The World Resources Institute certainly had a hand in this as well. And we basically see here that food systems have multiple underlying drivers. It's a system that encompasses all of the activities, all of the resources that go into making, distributing, and then consuming our food. The drivers and outcomes of those and the complex relationships between system participants and components are essentially depicted here. So what you know is that we eat a lot of different foods, right? And they're produced for many different reasons, subsistence, for income, et cetera, and at many different scales. They provide and recycle nutrients in different ways and use water from different sources. They're stored, distributed, and transported in different ways as well. But food is processed to varying extents, and then it's packaged to preserve food safety, for quality, and for convenience. It's also all dependent on the way that it is then brought to market by workers and ultimately brings us value in terms of availability, affordability, safety, advertising and promotion, and all the information that comes with the food that you buy. And our relationships are complex. We eat food, we waste food, as you've heard. All of this has varying environmental, economic, and societal impacts. And our dietary patterns over time can then impact our risk of chronic disease, right? And whether we consume adequate nutrients to support optimal health, or maybe we overconsume nutrients we shouldn't be, that impacts our risk of chronic disease. Regardless of any of it though, all of what we do has some degree of ecological footprint. Whether we're eating optimally and the most healthy foods we can, we are leaving an ecological footprint in all of those scenarios. So the other piece that is really important to consider is food and nutrition security. And food and nutrition security exists basically when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to food, which is then safely consumed in sufficient quantities and qualities to meet their needs, their food preferences, and is supported by an environment of adequate sanitation, health services, and care. Food and nutrition security is a key component of the sustainable food system. Neither is possible without a food system that is reliable, nutritious, culturally relevant, and environmentally sustainable. According to FAO, more than 1 billion people suffer from hunger today, 98% of which live in developing countries. And there are several things that have to be done to solve this problem, of which affordability is just one factor. The other is the supply chain, right? We've heard that a lot of people are going hungry, but yet we have an excess of food. We're wasting food. So a lot of it is about getting the right food to the right people. And that's where that food system approach comes into play. This is another depiction of the food system. This is the wheel that was created by FAO. It's centered around FAO's main goals in the center, which include poverty reduction, food security, and nutrition. These are embedded in the broader performance of the system, which refers to 3 other dimensions of sustainability, economics, social, and environmental factors. The performance is determined by those within the system, the diverse actors or stakeholders essentially in the food system. And that in turn takes place in the structure of the system, which consists of a core system, societal elements, and natural elements. The core system includes a layer of activities, right, through which food products flow. So that's the production, the aggregation, the processing, and waste disposal of the food. And then the services around that support the flow. All of this is embedded in a societal context, right? We have policies, we have laws, we have regulations, and infrastructures, and also the natural environment, the water, the soil, the climate. So it is very complex, but there's been a lot of attempts to describe this, such as with the wheel. And one thing to note with this additional depiction from FAO is that a sustainable food system should really generate positive value along all of these areas: economic, social, and environmental. And any proposed measure to any of these 3 areas really has to impact the other. This holistic vision really then allows us to identify synergies or reveal hidden trade-offs, right? So if we're improving nutrition and diet in one area, Are we potentially negatively impacting the societal area? So we need to always be considering all three areas of a sustainable food system to ensure that we're driving positive change across all areas and not just trading off one positive for a potential negative somewhere else. And that allows us an opportunity to look at sustainable diets as a food system again. And this is the output of the United Nations Food Systems Summit that took place just a couple of years ago, right in the midst of COVID, but they didn't let that stop them. Ultimately acknowledging that a sustainable food system as an entity will not guarantee improved nutrition, but it is a platform that helps us evaluate systems for improvement over time. So looking at the food system and considering where we can utilize that to both improve sustainability as well as improving nutrition is the approach taken here. And with this meeting, there were over 300 commitments made from across different sectors to try to positively impact and drive change towards better sustainability and better nutrition. And one area of the value chain you'll see on the right-hand side is preparation and consumption. And obviously that is a key area where chefs play a critical role in helping to ensure that individuals know how to prepare the healthy foods, know how to help reduce food waste, which you'll be seeing here shortly from Chef Mark. So that's an important component across that value chain. And there were ultimately 5 action tracks coming out of the Food Systems Summit. And I'm just going to share some examples from a couple of those on the next slide. You'll see here that many different entities made commitments. The first track of ensuring access to safe and nutritious food revealed several really great opportunities for impact. One was launching a workforce nutrition alliance to reach food system workers, so essentially to provide nutrition education to those across the food system so that they know how to choose foods for better nutrition. Also to promote production and consumption of sustainably produced high quality proteins. Protein is something that is obviously an essential nutrient, but we can get it from a variety of sources, and some are more sustainably produced than others. Scaling up biofortified crops, creating a sustainable market through verified sourcing areas and volume guarantee schemes was another recommendation that came forth. And in another area of shifting to sustainable and healthy consumption patterns, there were some additional suggestions made. Some of these you're probably already seeing take place. Fiscal policies, for example, economic measures that support food environments that provide access to affordable, healthy diets, encourage food reformulation to be lower in sodium, lower in sugar, for example. Education, both formal and informally, covering curriculums, school feeding programs, community level information campaigns, front of pack labeling, eco labeling. Many of you are seeing a lot of that in your different geographies already. And that's really intended to help consumers make more informed choices. And then last, but certainly not least, food-based dietary guidelines. All countries should have food-based dietary guidelines, and most do. So I want to share a few of those with you now. Food-based dietary guidelines are essentially based on the latest science around what is intended and appropriate for supporting health, reducing risk of chronic disease, and ensuring adequate nutrient intake. Healthy dietary patterns comprise a variety of nutrient-dense foods that are culturally appropriate based on the country, that are affordable and appropriate for all life stages. But there are differences between developed and developing countries. Developed countries' consumption of foods such as red and processed meats and starchy vegetables are currently over recommended amounts, while fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains, nuts, and fish are below. In developing countries, by contrast, they're already very reliant on plant-based sources of nutrients and have higher rates of nutrient-related deficiencies, and therefore face increased rates of diet-related disease for other reasons. So you can see here some countries that have really incorporated as well sustainability into their dietary guidelines. Countries like Netherlands, Sweden, and Brazil have developed dietary guidelines that focus on planetary health in addition to population health for people. Sweden's provides guidance on how to eat healthily and in an environmentally friendly manner. And the Netherlands, visualized in their Wheel of Five, references values for nutrients, feasibility, and environmental impact. Very recently, the Nordic dietary guidelines were launched, and they got a lot of attention because if you click through, the Nordic nutrition recommendations really take 36 different nutrients and 15 food groups based on their impact on health and the environment. So they did a phenomenal job of really addressing both of those at the food level and dietary recommendation. They promote a predominantly plant-based diet rich in vegetables, fruits, berries, legumes, potatoes, and whole grains, and also limiting alcohol, processed foods, and excess sodium and sugar. In China, according to estimates from the National Health Commission of China, the population currently overconsumes livestock and poultry, meat, and cereals compared to the dietary guidelines. This report from the World Resources Institute highlights that if the Chinese dietary guidelines were adhered to, they'd have essentially what they call a triple win, where it would help to improve both health, food security, and environmental sustainability through various degrees of behavioral change. Their main strategies are to enhance food security and promote healthier and more sustainable diets through a reliable supply of essential food groups and diverse protein sources, enhancement of domestic agricultural productivity, and reducing food waste. And then there's the report from Eat Lancet. Some of you may have already heard about this diet that essentially looked at this from a global scale. They looked at science across many different facets, and this was a commission consisting of 37 scientists around the globe who tried to answer the question on the top. Can we feed a future population of 10 billion people, as Kim mentioned earlier, a healthy diet within planetary boundaries? And based on the review they conducted, they believe the answer is yes, but it's going to require a significant transformation of our eating habits. They refer to this as the planetary health diet. And it is a flexible diet because it does have ranges associated with it. And the actionable output from the review was a set of dietary recommendations. The planetary health diet provides, again, those ranges of foods for intake, where it's more whole grain, fruit, vegetable, nut, and legume forward, and meat and dairy constitute important parts of the diet, but in significantly reduced amounts. The authors estimate that widespread adoption of such a diet would improve intakes of most nutrients. Some might need to be supplements such as B12 and calcium, for example, but that adoption could also reduce the risk of premature death along the range of 19 to 24% in most adults. And you can see here, similar to what Kim showed earlier with those planetary boundaries, this uses a little bit of a similar idea around the boundaries of the dietary recommendations. Using these health boundary targets, the authors modeled various scenarios to develop a sustainable food system and deliver healthy diets by 2050. To stay within boundaries, a combination of major changes in diet, improved food production through enhanced agriculture and technology changes, and reduction of food waste during production and at the point of consumption will be needed. And there's really no one single measure. The dietary changes needed were summarized as doubling the consumption of healthy foods such as fruits, vegetables, legumes, and nuts, while reducing added sugars and meat consumption by as much as 50%. However, as you can see here, that does vary depending on the geography that you're in, because sub-Saharan Africa, for example, consumes a high amount of grain-based products, as does South Asia, but currently is very under-consuming in terms of protein sources, such as animal-based proteins. They also modeled some scenarios of replacing foods with plant-based sources at a constant calorie intake. That's that leaf on the left. They modeled the changes that they would see if you started to just reduce excess energy consumption or increased energy consumption for where there is undernutrition occurring. And then lastly, following a balanced dietary pattern. They measured the effect on greenhouse gases, cropland use, water use, and nitrogen and phosphorus application. And what they found is that the combination of all three of those scenarios was deemed the most efficient model. So plant forward, energy controlled, and balanced diets. And that was particularly true in high and middle income countries. It improved nutrient levels, it helped reduce diet-related mortality, and could be achieved in all regions. Healthier diets, however, they did note in low-income countries could increase demand for environmental resources such as water. So there are some trade-offs, as I mentioned earlier. Ultimately, though, the health and environmental associations did vary a bit. We saw improvement in health and greenhouse gas emissions, fairly neutral effect on health and cropland and nitrogen use, but also a negative impact on fresh water use due to the increase in plant-based production. So getting all of this together has been, as I mentioned, quite an effort across the globe, but there are some common themes. And the FAO recently highlighted some of those common themes that are being brought together in terms of what a sustainable diet should consist of. And one of the key messages is diversity. Eat a variety of foods. Balance your energy intake with energy needs. Base your diet around minimally processed tubers and whole grains, legumes, fruits and vegetables. And if meat is eaten, eat it in moderate quantities and ideally eat all of the parts or utilize all of the parts of that animal. Dairy products or alternatives in moderation, unsalted meats, seeds and nuts, small quantities of fish and aquatic products from certified fisheries, limiting consumption of foods high in fat, sugar, or salt, or that are low in micronutrients, and oils and fats with a beneficial omega-3/6 ratio, and utilizing tap water in preference to other beverages. The good news is that it doesn't have to be a drastic change to your current diet. This particular modeling study out of the University of Michigan highlighted that very minimal changes can have significant impact on both health and diet and environment. You can see that there was a headline that caught a lot of people's attention because they quantified this in terms of dietary risk factors and the effect on disability adjusted life years. They found that just a 10% daily substitution can generate nutrition and environmental benefits. Substituting just as much as 200 calories per day of the most nutritionally or environmentally detrimental foods with an equal calorie amount of nutritious foods helped individuals gain approximately 48 minutes per day of a lifespan change and a 33% reduction in the carbon footprint. The recommendations were essentially to reduce processed meat, beef and shrimp, followed by pork, lamb, and greenhouse-grown vegetables, increase field-grown fruits, vegetables, legumes, and low environmental impact seafood and nuts, and that dairy, poultry, and many grain-based dishes could be substituted for foods that should be reduced without a negative impact. And then my last point I want to make before I turn it over to Chef Mark here is to get beyond just the intake component. As we talked about, we oftentimes have an overconsumption of food. Feeding that growing population isn't necessarily just about making more food, but it's also about distributing the food differently and minimizing the food that we are wasting today. The carbon footprint, as Kim mentioned, of food waste is greater than that of even the airline industry. A third of the food is being wasted, and that ultimately ends up being about 1,260 calories per person, which could really sustain an individual and avoid them suffering from hunger. There's a lot of food wasted just here in the US, and 37% of that food waste occurs in the home. Also, lastly, if you are having to throw food away, composting is definitely preferred over sending it to a landfill because that landfill, again, as Kim mentioned, decomposes and also produces gases such as methane, which are much more potent than even carbon dioxide. So I'll just summarize. I shared a lot with you here, but I have some key recommendations to hopefully just drive these points home. The goal for us on the next slide just is that we want to, of course, you can click through for me, ensure that food production supports a nutritious food supply and promotes human health while also protecting and renewing environmental, economic, and societal resources. The reason is that well-nourished, healthy people can promote environmental stewardship, economic vitality, and social cultural and ethical capital. We need our people to be well-fed, to be healthy, to maintain sustainability for all of us, for the planet, and for our economic future as well. How we do that is by promoting healthy dietary patterns, by ensuring that nutritious foods are available, accessible, and affordable. And that's really best achieved just through shifts in the diet versus radical transformation, perhaps replacing even one meal a week with a plant-based option, perhaps eating a bit more fruits and vegetables, and reducing meat consumption slightly, depending on where you are in the world, of course, as well. Lastly, that reduction of food waste through upcycling of nutritious ingredients and consumer education. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chef Mark, who's going to talk you through some great strategies for reducing food waste.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Kim. A lot of information, a lot of great information that we can take. And I know many of you are working on your own sustainable kitchens, or you're trying to reduce the waste, or you're trying to provide more plant-based and vegetable-based cuisines on your menus. So I want to talk a little bit about and give you a couple of examples. And we're going to start with the kind of humble pineapple. And, you know, it's a mainstay in many hotels and in many restaurants for fruit salads, for garnishes, etc. But the yield on it in terms of from a chef's perspective is pretty poor. The pineapple generally, depending on how you utilize it, has about a 40% yield. Not particularly good when we're thinking about our own food costs, and certainly not good when we talk about food waste, because most of that trim we deem as unusable. And if that unusable trim is not going to be, you're not going to do anything with it, you're just going to put it in the trash. So, but did you know the entire pineapple is able to be produced 100% yield? And we're going to talk a couple of different ways in which you can use the entire pineapple that not only can reduce, of course, food waste or create zero waste, but also provide some tangible nutrition. So the first item going to go through is I'll give you an idea of a drink, and it utilizes actually the tops, it utilizes the skins, it utilizes the bottom of the pineapple. That can be made into a drink. Our drink that we're going to show today is a morada. It's a Peruvian-inspired drink that's made from pineapple. So it's a traditional drink. It has some historical significance about traditional usage of the entire pineapple. We're going to flavor it with some brown spices, and we'll talk about it as we get to it. We'll also talk about what to do with those cores, those hard, very flavorful, but very hard cores in the center of the pineapple that can also be utilized to make a chutney, perfect for grilled meats or grilled vegetables, accents, savory flavors by providing a little contrast with sweet and sour. And then finally, we'll do something that's very simple. Something that everybody can do is actually the leaves right here make a wonderful tea that contain antioxidants, phenols, and coumaриc acid. So nice tea, nice beverage that you can make with it, but 100% yield. The one thing I do have to say is that after we utilize all these skins and leaves and things like that, we still have something that has a food waste element to it. We've extracted all the flavor out of it. We've pulled all the nutrients that we could out of it, but we're still left with waste. What to do with that? The best way that we can handle that, especially in our kitchens, is place the leftovers from either our beverage or the tea leaves that we've made into a tea, is to dry them in a dead air oven. You do so, at the end of that, it can be pulverized and added to your home garden or to other gardens. In other words, composting is still an option after you've used it. So let's start off with the first item, the morada, the Peruvian-inspired drink. Now this drink, we're going to show it just made, and we're going to show it in terms of just a sipping beverage. But in many countries in and around Peru, they make similar drinks in which it's fermented, which could possibly add more gut health or more enzymes that could contribute to gut health, possibly. So that's always an option. So I'm going to start here by just trimming my pineapple up very, very roughly. I'm going to take the cores out so we can use those cores in just a minute when we show you the chutney. So I'm going to put it right here, and we'll get this just started. So in order to make that beverage, the morada, We're going to take, very simply, we're just going to take a pot. We're going to add our top whole. We're going to add our bottoms. We're going to add all of our skins to that. Let's see. Of course, your pineapple would be used for salads, garnishes, whatever you're going to drinks, whatever you're going to use. But then we're going to add a little bit of flavoring or a little bit of spices. So we want to kind of spice it up. Maybe you can, and this could be variable. We're going to add a little bit of star anise. We're going to add perhaps a cinnamon stick, maybe some cardamom and some cloves. We'll add to the dish. And let's see, what else? I happen to have a few peeled oranges laying around. That'll be nice into the beverage. And then I want to cut up about 4 or 5 slices, peel and all, of some fresh ginger. We'll top that off with some water. And we'll add about 3/4 of a cup of sugar. This happens to be evaporated cane juice. You certainly could use honey. You certainly could use any other sugar that you wish, palm sugar, etc. But evaporated cane juice is what I had in the kitchen, so that's what we're going to use. We're going to put it on the stove, and we'll bring that up to a simmer. Remember that you'll have to simmer it for about 40 minutes. And then you want to allow it to steep for a minimum off the heat, a minimum of about 20 minutes. But it's actually really, really much more intense if you let it sit with those pineapple cores overnight and chill in the cooler. But what you end up with is a very flavorful drink. And I'm going to share that with my co-producers. So we're going to I'm going to add a little ice. I'll be back on the screen in just a second.
I have a question, Mark.
Sure.
Does the ginger give it a little spiciness? Is it kind of a little kick to it?
It just adds it out. It gives a little citrus note to it.
Okay.
You know, ginger has some perceived health benefits as well. So we have our drink here. I did for this one, I did add for the more of a traditional color. In Peru, they might add blue corn, pulverized blue corn, which is called chicha. But I've added hibiscus leaves just to give that nice, pretty color. So it's more appetizing. We'll pour them a quick drink and let them sip on that.
I'll be honest, whenever this time of year, starting to feel a little respiratory thing coming on, pineapple is my go-to for whatever reason. The vitamin C, that acidic aspect, I feel better. So.
And my go-to is ginger. So with
Ginger,
ginger,
see?
I go for the ginger too.
Yes.
I think ginger makes me just feel better. So we'll put a few pieces of pineapple in it so it looks nice.
So Chef Mark, do you know which country produces the most pineapple?
No, I don't.
It's Costa Rica.
Costa Rica, all right.
Cheers.
Cheers to Costa Rica if there's any
Yes.
chefs on there.
Exactly.
Now, we owe it to ourselves because not for many countries, access to pineapple is relatively a short drive. But for those of us that live away from the pineapple growing areas, it's our duty as chefs, as creators, to utilize the most we can. So the farther you live away, the more critical it is to use 100% of the fruit. So what do you think?
It's delicious.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's good.
Absolutely. Yes.
It's very refreshing. Again, you could ferment this. You could leave this at room temperature, create a little bit of a ferment, could put it into a bottle and create a little bit of effervescence. Either way, it's a delicious beverage, and it utilizes something that you would completely ordinarily, or what we have in the past, wasted. So I'm going to quickly go on to our next dish, in which I'm going to just really quickly talk about making a pineapple core chutney. The pineapple cores are tough. They have a nice flavor, but they're tough. And a little bit of cooking will soften them up nicely, yet they'll still keep their shape and their texture. So what I'll do here is I'll just cut up the pineapple cores, add them to my pot.
So Chef Mark, there was a question online around about concern around pesticides, sort of on the core itself or on the
skin
leaves
itself.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit? This was when you did this in one of our last sessions. I had the same thought, and I actually went and did some research on how do I clean.
So there is, and you should clean all your vegetables like that if you're concerned about pesticides. One of the most common ways is just to wash it with a mixture of baking soda and water. They have those other items out there that I know are available in some kitchens that you can wash your vegetables and fruits to get rid of those pesticides. Yes, it is a concern. You should thoroughly wash, dry, and clean all of your produce as it comes in and ready for prep. So that's a great question, though. So I have the pineapple cores. I'm going to add a little bit of oil in here. Try to use some sustainable oils. We're going to add some onions for a little bit of savoriness. We're going to add some ginger again. We're going to add a few diced red peppers. And we're going to add, just because I had them around, a few dried apricots. And we're going to bring that up to a simmer. And start getting those flavors to meld. And with that, I'm going to add some spices to this too. So we want it good. So I have a little bit of turmeric, some mustard seeds.
So Chef Mark, what kind of meats what kind of accompaniments would you use this for?
Certainly for poultry, grilled red meats. I know we watch them, but it's also good with seafood, especially sustainably sourced seafood. Could be simply with some nice whole grain breads. So I've added a few peppercorns in there. I'm going to add a cinnamon stick. And we'll let that kind of just simmer. We'll start to get that up and running and reducing down. So as the moisture and the liquid starts to come out of the pineapple core, we're going to add a little bit of sugar. And I'm doing this a little quick, but I'm going to add a little bit of sugar. And then I'm going to add a touch of vinegar. And in this case, another way to utilize waste was to, we here in our kitchen make our own vinegars. So this is a pineapple vinegar that we made. So with some of the scraps that were left over, we fermented it. It has a nice flavor. It's another great way of utilizing waste. Here's another one that was made from cherry pits. So we used some cherry pits and made a kombucha style of kind of vinegar. So I've added the sugar. I'm going to add the vinegar to it. Let that reduce down until it gets thick. I will say something I forgot to mention is onions in this dish is perfect. You know, the little trimming of the onions, the ends of the onions that you trim off, generally that's discarded. This is perfect for this kind of chutney, is to utilize all of that. So you're not only utilizing the stems or the cores of the pineapple, you're also using some of that's still very good trim from your onions as well. So always keep that in mind, that there's multiple uses for these small ends, and what you end up wasting is just that little root, which is perfect for composting. So what you end up with is a beautiful kind of chutney. It's got the pineapple, the sweetness of the apricots, some spice from some cinnamon. In this version that I made earlier, I added a red chili for a little bit of heat. But you can adjust it to however you prefer. And then, so we have this dish. Am I on full screen or am I? Okay, I am on full screen. Okay, I just see my screen up here. Here's a chutney, and Kim, give you a little taste.
And I imagine I could use any other vegetables if I have.
Oh,
some that are just
absolutely.
Sitting in my fridge.
Absolutely. It's a
potentially,
great way to do it.
consume.
Actually, what's really good with this is cabbage.
Ah,
Leftover cabbage mixed
Okay.
with the texture and the crunch, the slight sulfuric nature. There's some spoons right here. You can taste that, but it's perfect for grilled meats or seafood. Very nice dish.
I love cabbage for its filling nature, but very low energy density. Personally, it's one of those foods. Everyone's had the cabbage soup,
Yeah.
heard the cabbage soup, and there's a reason for
And
it,
and it historically, is probably one of the most common vegetables.
for sure, especially
So-
those.
All right, what do you think? Excellent. I can taste all the flavors coming through.
Ooh, oh wow, right away. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
that's
it's
delicious.
excellent. It's awesome.
A little
Thank
sweet,
you,
So-
Chef.
savory.
How are we doing on time? 5 minutes. All right, I got to quit. So another thing you can do is you can take the leaves. You can slice up the leaves real quick, put it into a teapot, add a little bit of boiling water to it, let it steep for it does take longer, about 10 minutes. Let that steep and you can have yourself a nice tea. So I'm going to pull this off to the side here real quick so we can get on. Using my pineapple.
Let me help.
So the next item I want to talk about is a plant-based braised gluten. Sometimes it's called seitan. What is that? What is seitan? Seitan is basically if you take flour and water and mix it together and then run it under cold water, you'll end up with pure gluten, the protein for wheat. It's a spongy texture, but has been used for centuries in Asia. Often you'll hear it referred to as mock duck, but it's a great way to incorporate more plant-based. And in this case, I'm doing a little bit of an ossobuco, which is ossobuco in quotes, because it's actually made from the seitan. For the traditional bone that's associated with ossobuco, I've used an artichoke stem. So often another item that's wasted or thrown out when we're processing artichokes. Artichokes are notoriously poor yield, but there's one way you can use the stems. If you braise them a little bit or cook them in a little bit of water, salted, acidulated water, they become tender and they certainly become edible. We've used that to mock the bone, and we've combined this with mushrooms. And I used mushroom peelings, of course, because that's what was left over in the kitchen. So, no sense of using whole mushrooms in a braise. They're all going to break down. I've used carrot ends and tips. Again, I've used the onions and I've used red bell pepper tops. So all of this is in an effort to reduce the waste. We'll go through, it's a classic braise. I will tell you that with seitan, you need to set that texture. So it does need to either be baked, roasted, or even deep fried briefly just to set the outside texture before it actually is going to braise. Unlike a traditional braise that builds upon the fond of the meat being seared in the pan, since we're dealing with vegetables, it starts with the mirepoix. It starts with the onions, the peppers, and then you'll add red wine, tomato paste, etc. And then with a slow braise. And what you end up with is a delicious dish that I'll go ahead and pull together here real quick.
Yeah, seitan being obviously made from gluten. For those that are avoiding gluten, that would be. Are there other options you would suggest, like a soy-based?
You certainly could. You could use textured vegetable protein.
Okay.
It certainly could be made from eggplant and legumes in and of itself.
Eggplant.
I've added some lentils here. You can, hopefully you can still hear me.
Yeah, so I'll try to add, translate. So adding lentils, but yes, definitely sounds like, so you could use some textured vegetable protein as well instead of the seitan if gluten is all a concern. That's fantastic to have an ossobuco that is sustainable, right? That also has some great nutritional aspects given the variety.
So you can see where it kind of resembles the idea of the classic dish. I think a great garnish instead of the traditional gremolata. We can use some of the carrot tops that we used from our carrot ends. We can chop that up real fine.
Gorgeous. It's really pretty. The colors are nice.
For some additional nutrition. We can take that. We can also take our lemon that we used earlier, and we can put a little bit of the zest on it to kind of wake up the flavor. And then finally, for just a touch of textural crunch, I'm adding a few pumpkin seeds, which are also very nutritious, as well as providing some texture. So I know I ran through that pretty quick, but it just kind of shows you the idea of taking plant-based to the next level, to minimizing the waste in your kitchen and creating dishes for you and your customers. So that's it for the demonstration. Hopefully, you enjoyed what we're doing. We certainly can get the recipes posted. But if there are any questions, I think we have just a couple of minutes. So let's see.
So
Yeah.
we've answered a number of them. It says jackfruit. Could jackfruit be used?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Jackfruit would be a great substitute,
Really good.
absorbs flavors really well.
There was a question here also on, I think, GMO. How will GMO affect the sustainability effort? So hotly debated topic, definitely has a role to play, both in a positive and negative way. So depending on where you are in the world, there are actually restrictions on GMO and using genetically modified organisms. I don't know, Jackie,
Yeah.
if you've got.
Well, I think from a nutritional standpoint, I mean, GMOs, obviously there's no negative impact from a nutritional standpoint. And if anything, there's actually a lot of potential benefit with some technologies to address some of the concerns around sustainability and nutrients and even anti-nutrients. So nutrients that make it more difficult to absorb the nutrients that we get from certain foods. So as Kim said, hotly debated, but ultimately, you know, something that is still evolving over time in terms of technologies and opportunities around genetically engineered foods.
So we have one question here, Chef, which is around the response and feedback on the low waste recipes from the majority of
the
tasters.
That's right. So yeah, it's really difficult if you're on a menu and say, yeah, we made this with food waste. It's like, oh, great. I'm glad I have my dinner made with garbage. No, that's not it. The first and foremost is to talk about the story that you and your establishment has toward ethical and responsibilities to the environment as well as the health of their diners. So whether that's in the front of the menus or whether that's part of the website for your restaurant or hotel, that it's all part of the message that you're sending out. Providing it is not something you have to mention that you're utilizing waste products if they know already that your kitchen is a sustainable kitchen or is working toward those sustainability goals for your region. So you don't have to necessarily call it out. When we're talking about plant-based, we're talking about plant-based in general. So emphasizing the vegetables, emphasizing the health more with offerings like this, without being overt to say that it is food waste, so to speak. We know that. We know we're controlling costs. We know we're doing something better for the world, and we know we're doing something for the health of the planet.
I think that's it.
I think that's it. So I appreciate it. I wish we had more time. We will have these recipes for you. We'll certainly, I believe, have the presentation deck to World Chefs. So thank you very much. Have a great day or a great evening wherever you are in the world. And I can't wait to see everybody in Singapore.
Awesome.